I'm so glad that Seth Rogen waited to make this show. But yes, to your point, it's so technically precise. They don't treat the subject of what they're doing lightly. They're serious about making it funny, but they're also serious about
Hmm.
showing exactly how it happens. Let's talk about something more exciting.
Yeah,
Let's talk about the studio.
the studio.
How do you feel about variable runtimes, episode to episode, before we get going?
That's a good question. I guess I don't hate it, right? And that's largely because I just have time on my hands.
True.
Working a part-time job, I'm not like I don't have a super packed schedule, and so it's not the worst thing in the world to have a 35-minute episode followed by a 55-minute episode. I can see how it could be frustrating for some people, but I think it's clear that they're just letting whatever stories they want to tell breathe.
Yeah, it's the first thing I think I've seen in a while that feels comfortable doing it and then doesn't feel awkward. Like
Hmm.
they added fluff or they're cutting for time. At least for me, I'm like, I'm not like you're saying, I'm not someone who's in such a rush to watch an episode before going to work or something that I'm like, it better be
Yeah.
25 minutes exactly. I first heard about the show. We got like a presser or something like that from the Apple TV publicity team just saying Seth Rogen's working on a show called The Studio, where he's a studio executive head who takes over this kind of struggling slash dying studio. And the whole series is about what he's doing to keep it alive in his day to day. That said, when I opened up our Apple TV Plus screeners app months ago and saw it already on there, I was kind of like, oh, does this catch me up to start it? It didn't at the time. I was finishing Silo. I was finishing Big Door Prize. I was finishing a couple other random shows, a little bit of Hijack here, a little bit of Severance. We started off. So by the time I actually watched it, I had lower expectations, and that made this the most perfect watch. Now, I think I reversed it for you by setting the expectations a little high. So I hope
You
it kind of
did.
delivered.
No, you did set the expectations a little high, but rightly so. I think this show works on a number of layers. And one of the layers is that it's good TV.
Yeah.
It's good TV with good characters, with good actors who are good at what they're doing, good writers, good, like, it's just good. And I'm not saying this is as good as Dune 2, but the thing that I've been saying for the last year, which is when something is working, when something is hitting on all cylinders, you can
Yeah.
really. And this is a project that is just hitting on all cylinders, from acting to writing to stage blocking to editing. Like, it's all working, and it was an enjoyable, digestible, not super heady. It's still Seth Rogen. It's still funny. It's still kind of insane in those Rogen antics, but it's also just super solid. It's just a solid watch.
Yeah, it's funny because the franchise, which came out on HBO Max a couple months ago, when I heard about the franchise, I had wished it was going to be more like what we actually get with the studio.
Mhm.
Funny, quick, very quippy, more jokes and laughs while showing the reality of it than serious, where the
Mhm.
franchise, did you ever give it a watch?
No.
It's supposed to be a satire inspired by real stories from people who worked on Marvel and DC properties, and it doesn't hit. And I love the cast. I absolutely love the cast, but it just does not hit right. It's
Yeah.
very full of itself in moments and just dramatic and monotonous and just kind of boring. Where this, from the jump, it reminds me a lot of the Birdman soundtrack. There's the drums moving the whole time. It's a very fast pace. Like you
Yeah.
texted me, Seth Rogen just can't stop falling into things in a Chris Farley fashion, and you're just like, wow, he's giving it his all. He's serious by being funny, and he's funny when he's serious. And it just is this perfect mix of if Michael Scott ran a studio, what would that be like? And he's got a heart of gold, but he's just trying too hard. And he's just a little bit much. But yeah, let's talk about the cast. Who did you enjoy from the cast? What did you like most about the cast of the studio?
I mean, obviously, I like Seth Rogen. He's who we immediately recognize.
Yeah.
So this kind of just felt like a who's who of Seth Rogen's team of people that he works with.
Yeah.
Like, I was almost surprised that Rose Byrne wasn't in it at all. I thought Catherine O'Hara did a great job. Ike Barinholtz, who I feel like he's only played like kind of bit comedy, like side pieces. I feel like I remember him from Mad TV back in the day. I feel like Chase Suey Wonders, who plays Quinn,
Hmm.
I've never seen her in anything else before, and she did a great job. She did a fantastic job. Obviously, Catherine Hahn, love Catherine Hahn. She's having a moment right now with everything
Yeah.
that she's doing, and she just loves to play characters. We love to watch her play characters that just chew the scenery and are just better than everyone else, or think that they're better than everyone else. Yeah, and then of course, obviously, you get a ton of guest stars in each episode where actors, real world actors, are playing themselves, real world directors are playing themselves, and that's always fun to watch them interact, and be either themselves or be a caricature of themselves. Hard to know.
Yeah, I mean that first episode, I guess we'll kick into the first episode a little bit, talk a little bit about plot, what we liked about it, and
Hmm.
without giving too many spoilers, you will have already seen from the trailers and things like that. Bryan Cranston plays Seth Rogen's boss, and he is just so good as the sweaty, a little old, fake spray tan, jingle jangle chain, gold rings, and he just plays an amazing studio executive as Griffin Mill. Had a Continental, and he's just when Seth Rogen first walks in, you're like, oh my gosh, that's Bryan Cranston and all the makeup. But then he starts going, and you're like, there it is. There's Breaking Bad Bryan Cranston. There's
Hmm.
Malcolm in the Middle Bryan Cranston. The range, the dedication. He's just so good at Griffin Mill. And kicks off our episode of this moment of Seth Rogen's Matt Remick and Ike Barinholtz Sal Saperstein are both wondering who's going to take Catherine O'Hara's job. Her name was Patty Lee. She's been ousted. And it's like a momentary discussion before Seth's pulled in Matt Remick and gets the job from Bryan Cranston. I think that's kind of a fun way in how he does it. Did I really get the job moment? It's like, yeah, you got it.
With the intense major caveat that you have to make a really stupid movie.
Now, what movie was that?
It was the Kool-Aid movie.
The Kool-Aid
In the world
movie.
where we're making all IPs into movies, and they're of course they operate within a fictional version of our real world. They're referencing how the Barbie movie did so good on being IP based on toys and stuff. And Seth Rogen has to be like, the reason that it was so good was because of Greta Gerwig. It
Yeah.
was because it was a creator led story, and Bryan Cranston's like, just make the Kool-Aid movie, and it's going to be our next big $1 billion tentpole movie. Yeah,
I mean, I have his quote, and we're going to make it PG-13 enough. But he's like, if Warner Brothers can make $1 billion on the plastic tatas of a vagineless doll, we can make $2 billion off of the legacy IP of Kool-Aid. And that right there is such a joke, and you have to laugh while you're watching, like, okay, yeah, Kool-Aid. But you know these meetings are happening, which is the worst part. I mean, we
yeah.
reviewed Battleship last year. What a fun ride that was. But when I heard of all the other Parker Brothers and Milton Brothers or these board game IPs, it was like, no, please don't. Anyway, and I love that it's after that that we get the intro crawl, right? The Hollywood style
Hmm.
opening credits, something reminiscent of old Hollywood. And when we come back, Seth Rogen's Matt Remick is like Petra, his assistant. Set some interviews, only the finest auteurs for Kool-Aid. And you just have to laugh because you know he's genuine.
Yeah,
The finest auteurs.
yeah. So one thing before we say more about the plot beats of the story, one of the things that I love about the show, they are being so respectful of their craft. Like, I think the first opening scene is a oneer, and it goes for a while. And it wasn't until I don't know how long that first opening one was, but it wasn't for at least 2 or 3 minutes in where I was like, "Oh, this is a oneer."
Hmm.
And then it just kept happening. Yes, there are cuts, but they are few and far between, meaning that every scene is an extended take where you get actors who are interacting with each other, blocking with each other, running around a set with each other, and you get camera movements that are really methodic, and you can tell that there is a lot of care and craft and love put into the show because you can't get episodes after episode after episode built around 5 or 6 oneers
Yeah.
without a lot of passion for what you're doing, without a team full of people who are just like deeply passionate about what they're doing. And that's something that I really stuck out with me and stuck with me through the entire show, was just their attention to detail and their attention to their craft is palpable. It's obvious. It's tangible.
Yeah, almost like Spielberg waiting to do The Fablemans, the story of his life growing up
Mm-hmm.
in filmmaking. I'm so glad that Seth Rogen waited to make this show. He might have
Mm-hmm.
had the idea 10 years ago. Who knows? He's always talking about how ideas for he and Evan take so long to get made. But yes, to your point, it's so technically precise and well shot. The color grading is beautiful. It doesn't
Yeah.
look washed out like so many other shows. And to your point, they don't treat the subject of what they're doing lightly. They're serious about making it funny, but they're also serious about
Mm-hmm.
showing exactly how it happens. Where I think it would have been easier for Seth Rogen 10, 15 years ago to just do slapsticky, stupid boss. There's fart jokes every 2 seconds, which there still are fart jokes, but like to a
Yeah.
different extent. This is much more like I've been here for a while. I know this. I want to show it to everybody so that people in the industry are like, oh, that's someone who knows exactly what happens on set or in a studio,
Yeah.
which I love as an audience member.
Yeah. And even the set design, like everything has an
Yeah.
aesthetic and it's so beautiful. Like from costuming to set design to their like the chosen color, like their color grading, not just the color grading and the editing, but also their color palettes that they've chosen as characters, as costumes, like whatever.
Yeah.
And then I'm pretty sure some of this stuff is obviously shot on film. It's got to be shot on film because it feels like there's an earthiness or grittiness to it that I feel like I see in film. Although it's possible that with filters and overlays you can kind of recapture some of that stuff. There is one moment in the first episode where I was like, what? Oh, it's an extended take between Ike and Seth where they're at lunch talking about, the Kool-Aid project.
Yeah.
And you can tell that they did some kind of CG overlay on Seth's mouth. And it was a blink and you miss it kind of moment. But I saw that and I was like, what the hell? And it was like, oh, clearly, well, if they're doing oneers,
Yeah.
the setup for these things and the long takes, like it is hard to get it right. And if you change dialogue like halfway through or something, like it's hard to go back and like recapture those precise moments. And so there was but it was the only time that I think I saw it happen.
Well, and for everyone listening, we might have the earlier version because we're on the screen one where it's not fully polished.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
But I will say look out for that because it might not be better than what we already saw because it is
Yeah.
difficult to really kind of mark over that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, the cast is so great. The attention to detail is so great. Getting the story right is so great. I love that it's written by a handful of people. It's not just Seth and Evan. It's like the first
Mm-hmm.
episode was Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg, Peter Huyck, Alex Gregory, and Frida Perez. And then throughout the entire series, we have different people take different episodes, and you can see all of their styles change a little bit, but they stay so true to the show, it doesn't feel jarring. I know we're going to talk about Severance Season 2 already at this point, but everyone's crediting Ben Stiller, Ben Stiller, Ben Stiller. When you look at it, you're like, wait, Dan Erickson created the show. He's written a bunch of the episodes. There's a few other writers. They're directed by so many different people. There is a different feel to some of them,
Mm-hmm.
where this to me was like, good theme throughout, good attention to detail throughout. It doesn't feel jarring. It feels cohesive, even though every episode tells a little bit different story and a different setup, I guess.
Yeah. Honestly, because this first episode basically revolves around the antics around trying to get someone attached to the Kool-Aid movie. And
Yeah.
it's everyone from the guy who did Captain Underpants movies to Martin Scorsese. And, trying to get Martin Scorsese's auteur film about the Jonestown Massacre made into a Kool-Aid script because they drank Kool-Aid, which honestly, hilarious. Then you watch Seth Rogen's character, Matt Remick, have to waffle around as he's trying to negotiate the making of this Kool-Aid movie. And he gets Martin Scorsese attached and he's trying to make really tough calls and with a lot of money attached to all these tough calls as he's trying to satisfy studio executives with creative people. And that's what the heart of this show is about, is it is watching someone essentially be crucified on the cross that is the cross between executive billionaire power and creative authorial intent. and then you watch Seth Rogen, Matt Remick die on the crossroads of those two energies every episode.
And it's funny because you can assume that this is partially true for Seth, but also just so many people in Hollywood that they love the movies so much. I mean, you see a lot of interviews where these people are just gushing over movies that maybe feel pretentious to other people just because they are classics, but they really do love them, or they like goofier things or otherwise. But they really do love film and they love television and they love the art of making these stories come to life and people connecting with them. And so, yeah, we do see Matt Remick stuck, just a total fan of the Finchers and the Scorseses and Greta Gerwig, having to make a Kool-Aid movie. And I love it so much because you see so many people having to sell out or taking other roles and options where you're like, what are you doing acting in this movie? Who knows?
Yeah.
Jason Momoa is in a Minecraft movie. Okay, maybe that's right
Yeah.
for him. I don't know. But I really love that it shows things like him talking to the agent, Mitch White, played by David Krumholtz, who's just every other word is making a Jew joke or saying Jew you out of something. And he's like,
Yeah.
look, just because we're both Jewish doesn't mean you can say this. It's like, oh, that's kind of fun. You see that a little bit. Or like he's in the marketing meeting and one of his marketing leads is like, well, yeah, the Kool-Aid man's doing the Zay Zay Shuffle. And he's like, what is the Zay Zay Shuffle? And it's this moment of this guy who absolutely idolizes these auteurs, storytelling, whatever, has to sit in a meeting where a CGI Kool-Aid man's doing a TikTok dance. And that is kind of the nature of what's happening today. I know Maya Hawke recently came on a couple interviews and was like, I believe that, and I've heard that producers are looking at Instagram and TikTok followings when choosing who to cast to know that they have a guaranteed audience for their trailers.
Yeah,
And
I
you're
saw
like,
that. Yeah.
gross. But that is the nature of what's happening today. I like that it shows the reality of it without going too cynical or kind of balances like, this is weird, but we have to do it to get something made. Okay, one for you, one for them. Do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it does pull back the curtain a little bit. And it's hard to know how much of this is just played for laughs versus how much of it is
Yeah.
authentic to the way movies are actually made. I'm sure it's a healthy mix because choosing who to cast in a movie based on Instagram followers sounds ridiculous, but it sounds too true to be fake.
Yeah.
Based on the 2025 that we've had, it's clear that once you make a certain amount of money, you're just out of touch with reality.
Yeah.
And what the studio shows is that you get a bunch of people who are out of touch with reality making decisions to try and appeal to the people who live in reality and how ridiculous that whole prospect is.
I don't want to share too much from future episodes. There's one about casting that's just so amazing that we'll cover later. But it is people being out of touch. It's Miss Blue saying, what's a banana cost, Michael? $10?
Oh, yeah.
It's that moment of, can we get this person? Should we get this person? The fact that Matt is trying to force Martin Scorsese's Jonestown movie to pass off as his Kool-Aid, knowing how terrible it puts Kool-Aid everything else. I know, at least for me in that scene, he's sitting down with Marty, and I'm like, oh, he's going to have to tell Marty he's got to stop the idea because he can't, like, give Kool-Aid a bad name with all this money. And instead offers him $10 million and $250 million plus to shoot. It's fun. It's funny. That would not be happening in real life, hopefully. But how did you love the scene where Matt Remick goes to talk to Patty Lee, Catherine O'Hara's character, at her house?
I thought it was great. I think there's only two different camera cuts in this one, I want to say. So the first
Yeah.
one is, he drives up to her house. The camera follows him up to the front door, into the house, and then they start talking, and then they just follow around through her house. And I know that this is the magic of movie making, right? Like I've seen YouTube videos of just like things that work in movie logic, but don't work in real life logic. Where like you get a Spielberg scene of top down of someone sliding money across the counter and someone sliding a hamburger across the counter.
Yeah.
And then we just accept that as logic. And then the camera moves on and the story moves on and we accept that as a transaction. That's just not how transactions work in the real
Sadly.
world, but it does. That's how it works in the movies.
Yeah.
And a conversation between two people doesn't move about the house in the same way that this one does.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter because it's fun to watch and it's beautiful and it's movie logic and we love it because it shows two actors who are really good at their craft with camera work that is really good and it's a great set and we get to see this beautiful house. And then I want to say there's a cut and then you get this really long shot of a sunset over LA.
Yeah.
Where you get the dialogue of Matt Remick and the studio head. What's her name?
Patty Lee.
Yeah, you get the dialogue of Matt Remick and Patty Lee, which is Seth Rogen and Catherine O'Hara, overlaid over this really wide shot over the LA skyline at sunset. And the camera is slowly just pushing in. and you see that that's the two of them underneath a palm tree having a conversation, having like a negotiation essentially about selling souls for money and all that kind of stuff. And then it pulls in really close, and then it's a tight kind of shot on both of them.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the scene, it's just a close up on Seth Rogen finishing the scene. And I think that's the end of episode 1. And what a fantastic shot that was. Like when I watched that, I distinctly remember I'm like, oh, I put my phone down and I was like, okay, I'm watching.
Yeah.
And I'm watching this whole thing happen. And it was just a very artistically put together scene. I loved it.
It goes to show that they're not just making a comedy slapstick, right?
Yeah.
Which that's fine too. That's also fun. There are a lot of slapsticky moments that you're like, this is the comedies we've been missing. Okay. It's comedy plus drama. But it feels like theater, and that sounds too haughty and hoity-toity for some people. So I'm going to dumb it down and say it's every person's theater. We're not going into Shakespeare, but the setup and payoff is just so precise. I had to pause and start the episode over and jump back because I had to make sure. The episode kicks off with a little speech from an on-set movie getting shot with Paul Dano. And he sits there bleeding out in his lines like, you're going to do good, kid. You know how I know why? You had the best teacher there is. Cut. And he's been blasted and he's talking about blood, whatever. We kind of forget about it until we have the speech with Patty at the end where she's like, heavy is the head, Maddie. This job's a meat grinder. It makes you stressed, panicked, and miserable. When it all comes together and you make a good movie, it's good forever. You'll make a great studio head. You know why? Because you had the best teacher. And it serves so many different points because you're like, oh, she is a great teacher. Oh, and then you realize a seasoned studio exec gave a note to the director of that movie and said, here's what you need to add in there. And it works so well at the beginning of the episode. And it ties it all together. And you're like, it's Catherine O'Hara, Patty Lee is the Yoda to Matt Remick's Luke, you know?
Yeah.
The Dumbledore in Harry Potter. It's just this beautiful moment of she's still going to be in the story, which is good for us as the audience, to having her own story and her own arcs and plots, but also that we get to have this wise sage say, it's hard, it's going to suck, but you're going to do well because you had a great team. And I just love it so much. The episode does go on a little afterwards because he has to tell Marty to fuck off, which really sucks. And Marty Scorsese cries. And there's a lot of jokes about Ray Liotta's penis. Or as they say, rest in penis, king. I guess my final notes, you're going to love the humor. You're going to love the plot. You're going to love what it shows us. If you do or don't know Hollywood. And from everyone who's already released reviews after South by Southwest screenings, people are loving it. And this is not like, we don't want to overhype it, which I know it already is. But I'm going to say this is one of the better shows I've watched in a long time. For everyone listening, and you're going to think I'm crazy, I've watched it 3, almost 4 times now in preparation for our reviews we're doing. It's just so good.
Yeah. No, 2 things. One, I feel like the tone, it's almost like fits in the same universe as La La Land. And I know that's a weird comparison to make because it's still a love letter to LA and the industry scene down there, but it just feels rich in the same way that La La Land, I thought, felt really rich, where it was made by people who just loved their craft, and it showed. Yeah, I'd say that on the spectrum of shows where you've got Severance on the one side, where it's like, this is deep, this is serious, this is really like, you got to pay attention. And then you've got, something like the other Seth Rogen one, Platonic, which is the Rose Byrne Seth Rogen comedy on the other, where you could just tell that this is just kind of vapid vein, funny show.
Yeah.
This is a pretty comfortable in the middle, like a really great combo of humor, but also just a really great dedication to craft in the same way that like Severance is obviously a great dedication to craft. And it results in a really well-rounded, well-balanced show that has depth and it like rewards paying attention. And so this is a show that I'd say you can watch this pretty healthily without having to look at your phone at all.
And it moves quickly enough and doesn't get stuck in its own way, which I made this comment. We were talking to some indie folks recently of like, sometimes you have a first timer or someone early in their career and all they want to do is just give you speech after speech after speech because they have something to say, where this feels much more like Seth's like, oh, no, we have something to say. And what we are going to say together is more important than every one person giving a speech. And I think it's short enough and long enough to stay engaged the whole time. There's a couple episodes that may feel a little slower or a little faster at parts, but because the ensemble is just so great, you're never left wanting in general because you got someone else to say something, some other problem to come up, some new storyline that doesn't follow just one story all the way through. It does
Mhm.
hit back on it throughout the season and wraps it up nicely. But I think it's fun, and I think the people that have seen it so far that have worked in the industry are like, oh, this feels genuine without feeling cynical. Like your
Mhm.
Severance and Platonic or like La La Land. La La Land might be a little too rosy at parts, and maybe a little too fantastical because it is a musical. Then you have Nope on the other side, which Jordan Peele did all about Hollywood, and it's a little rough and cynical and how it chews you up and it's a monster trying to eat you. This
Oh
is
yeah.
more on the La La Land side of the middle, like probably a step or two. But I do like that it's not so one side or the other.
Yeah, it's kind of like Babylon, but more rosy than Babylon was.
Yeah.
I mean, still Damien Chazelle, but
A little rosier. Well, let's wrap it up there for today. So, episode one, this is called Their Promotion. And we hope you guys go watch on Apple TV Plus if you haven't already. We're going to have reviews drop the same day the new episodes drop of this show. So keep watching.